town. I lived with my uncle and grandmother. This is a horror story I experienced at that time. Almost 10 years later, the memory hasn't faded. When I was about 15 years old, my grandmother held my hand one day and said, "If some girl begs you to help her at night, do not help her. You have to ignore it and run away." It was a very famous rumor in this town. I thought it was just a story made up by somebody like any other ghost story, so I didn't really care about it back then. Actually, everyone in the neighborhood knew this story. If you hear a girl's voice at night, you must run, or you'll die. It was an obvious story. Then one night, I was out playing outside with my friends, and it suddenly got dark. Man, Grandma's gonna be pissed. I started walking home in a hurry, but the way home wasn't close. It soon became dark outside, and I was walking alone on an empty road. I began to get a little scared, so I purposely hurried up, humming to myself to calm down. Then, I heard a girl's voice in the forest next to the road.
"Help me."
I felt a chill run down my spine. As soon as I thought I heard it wrong, I heard the voice once again.
"It hurts."
Although it was a really small voice, I could tell for sure it was the voice of a girl. I looked where the voice came from, but all I could see was the dark forest. But then I saw something behind a tree. Its appearance in the dark began to become clearer. There was a little girl lying behind the tree. I was extremely taken aback. Thinking that she might have been hurt, I tried to approach her. However, I immediately recalled what my grandmother had told me. With a feeling of wariness, I stayed on the spot and stared at her. Then, the girl moved slightly and said once again,
"Is anybody there?"
I couldn't see her clearly in the dark, but something was unnatural. It didn't feel right. I moved slowly to escape from the spot. I heard her voice again and again, but I didn't get any closer. As I kept walking to the side, I could see the back of the tree. She wasn't lying down. Someone was hiding behind the tree, holding her up and supporting her body. Her body was lulled. I couldn't tell whether she was dead or alive. Then, my heart dropped. I made eye contact with the man who was hiding behind the tree. He suddenly jumped out of the forest and started running towards me like crazy.
"Help this poor girl!"
It was the same girl's voice that I had just heard before. Screaming, I started to run away. Ah! This time, I heard the man in a deep voice. Crap, he didn't fall for it. I felt the fear of death and my whole life flashed before my eyes. Just then, I saw a flashlight in front of me and realized what it was shortly afterward. My uncle came looking for me on his bike. My God, I'm alive. Thinking this, I burst out crying. I ran to my uncle, and when I looked back, the man was gone. I told my uncle and grandmother everything I saw, and we soon called the police. Police began searching for him, believing that he was involved in several disappearances in the town, but they failed to find him. I still can't forget the voice I heard that night. I probably wouldn't be here right now if I wasn't so lucky. Always be careful of the stranger's voice.
Occurred 2 years ago. This is by far the craziest thing that has happened in my life. It all started when I was walking home one night after eating at a restaurant with a friend of mine. It was around the end of the summer season and going into fall, so I was slightly shivering. You might be wondering why me, a young woman, is walking home all alone in the night with no one else around to accompany me. Well, I wasn't carrying anything close to value like a purse, so no immediate theft target besides me myself. Then again, I learned karate in a course of 4 years, so I thought I could put up a fight if I needed to. Anyways, I'm a bit embarrassed to say this, but I was very distracted smelling my armpit since it stank so much at that moment that I didn't notice someone in front of me with her back turned. We collided, and I apologized. The person I bumped into was a girl who looked slightly older than me, maybe 2 years. When she first saw me, her expression glowed in awe. I asked her if she was okay. She said she was fine, introduced herself as Mia, and then randomly said that I looked pretty and how I had a nice outfit and jewelry. In my opinion, what I was wearing was nothing fancy, just casual. But hey, we all have our different opinions. To be specific, I was wearing a sleeveless plain white tank top, dark blue jeans that extended to my heels, and red running shoes. In fact, much like a cartoon character, I wore this outfit almost every day. Also, I know I am basically bragging here, but I was pretty attractive. I was slim and had wavy, shoulder-length brown hair. "Thanks," I said, rubbing my hand on my other arm shyly in response. Lastly, I was wearing no jewelry at all. I may have found out the reason why, and that is the way she was talking. It sounded like she drank some booze, but not too much. And only then I started smelling it from her, in addition to her not walking that normally. As drunk as she was, she didn't look threatening at the same time. From what I can tell from my point of view, at least, I assume that she was a lesbian. Not that I'm against lesbians, for anyone who is curious, but at the same time, I wasn't comfortable being in a full relationship with a female, but just being a friend. She asked me if I wanted to come with her and spend the night at her place. I didn't want to be rude right away, so I politely said, maybe soon, but not tonight. I was down with having another friend, as she looks nice and innocent. That's when stuff suddenly started hitting the fan out of nowhere. It all started as soon as we were done exchanging our contact information with each other when I saw something moving behind Mia. Before I could even think what it was an extremely large hooded man dressed all in black with his face mostly covered by his hood charging at Mia. I then saw him wielding a large butcher's knife. At that point, Mia seemed to sober up a bit, screaming after turning around and realizing the predicament she was in. Before I could do something, I watched in horror as he grabbed her and started thrusting the knife into her right arm and started to violently cut it off. And unfortunately, he succeeded as I heard the dreaded noise of the severed arm hitting the ground with a splat. I knew I had to think fast before things went from bad to worse. The man didn't seem to really notice me when I first saw him, so I quickly tackled him to the ground, pinned him, then punched him in the face a few times. I grabbed the knife from him and threw it a good distance from him. I saw his face bleeding pretty good from my blows. I wasted no time as I told the girl she could come with me to my house so she can be safe, and we both immediately sprinted for my place. Amazingly enough, after what has happened to her, it seemed that the alcohol she drank numbed the pain quite a bit, so she was still able to run under her own power. After what seemed like forever, taking a few detours and looking back to make sure we weren't being followed, we finally reached my place. We got inside, with Mia still rapidly bleeding. My parents were home, and they were really scared and confused as to what was going on. I told them I can explain later, and that for now they need to call 911. I told them the location of the attack, which luckily I still remembered where it happened. A few moments later, an ambulance came along with a police car. Mia was taken to the hospital, while, amazingly, the man was actually found unconscious with all the evidence of the crime occurring still there. The blood, the arm, the knife, everything. So it was easy for police to piece together what happened and arrest the man. Since then, Mia has made a full recovery in the hospital, and we ended up being good friends. She even started to take karate classes herself. Despite that, she still wanted me to walk with her to have each other's backs. What can be learned from all this in the end? I suggest that you should always have your guard up in a situation like this, and to just always have something with you to defend yourself with. Stay safe out there. You can almost never know what can happen out there.
December, I got myself a Christmas temp job working at Amazon, helping with deliveries. It gets pretty busy around that time for deliveries, obviously, because it's Christmas. Right away, I hated the guy I was helping with deliveries. His name was Frank. To describe him, he was a bit overweight, didn't shave well, and his hair was short. I didn't like him because he was very rude and seemed like he was in a bad mood all the time. And I would be in the van with him most of the time making deliveries, and it was very awkward. I tried to make conversation with him, but like I said, he was very rude, and there was no point in trying after about 2 times. I thought about quitting, to be honest, or at least be with a different delivery driver, but I didn't want to cause any trouble. I was a temp after all and needed this job. I thought Frank was really rude and socially awkward and not a nice person to be around, but I never thought he would harm me in any way. One evening after finishing deliveries, we were driving back to the Amazon warehouse, or at least that's where I thought we were going. Frank passed the turn where we always go to the warehouse. As I said before, we didn't really speak, so I wasn't about to question him. He would probably snap at me anyway. After he continued driving, the more obvious it was to me he was taking me to another place, and it wasn't the warehouse. I finally asked Frank where we were going. He didn't snap at me, surprisingly. He just said we needed to run and do a quick errand. I was looking around my surroundings, and I could see that we were around empty fields and abandoned farmhouses. At this point, it was getting dark outside. Frank then pulled up next to a tall, overgrown, and unkempt cornfield. He said to me in a very firm voice to stay exactly where I was. "Don't move." Frank then got out of the car and started walking up into the dirt road, disappearing into the dark of night. 10 minutes went by. I sat in the van by myself in the dark and had no idea where I was. My phone was in the warehouse in the locker, as we weren't allowed to have our phones during work hours, so I couldn't even go on my phone or use it as a light source. I needed to pee and couldn't hold it any longer, so I got out of the van and headed into the cornfield to do my business. After doing so, I started to walk back towards the van. In the near distance of the cornfield, I could see flashlights. 2, in fact. I found that really odd, as the whole area seemed to be abandoned. As I got closer to the van, I could hear a sort of heated argument going on between Frank and another man whose voice I couldn't recognize. I couldn't see him either. I heard the other man say, "Where is she? You said she was in the van." Frank then told the man that she was just in there, and she has to be around here somewhere. The other man said to Frank, "If we don't find her, you're a dead man." That's what those flashlights were. Those men were already out in the cornfield searching for me. I snuck off into the field, walking quickly but as quietly as I could, the whole time crying and thinking I was about to die. After walking far enough, eventually leaving the cornfield, I ran down the side of a long dirt road. I have no idea for how long, but eventually I came across an old diner which was still open, thank God, and the manager called the police for me. After this incident, I quit my job, but this wasn't the end of it. About 2 weeks after quitting my job, I got a call from my boss who employed me. He told me that I was the last one to see Frank, as no one has seen him since. Apparently there were rumors that he owed people money from gambling debts, the people you don't want to be in debt with. As much as I don't like to think about it, I'm pretty sure Frank's way of paying off his debts with those people was to hand me over to those men. And what those men had planned to do with me, I never wanted to imagine.
This incident happened a couple weeks ago, and I still remember it like yesterday. I was a local jogger that would casually say good morning to neighbors and strangers. I also lived alone and single, as my ex-boyfriend left me for a taller girl, but I'm not here to talk about that. It was a Thursday evening. I put on my jogging clothes and timing bracelet as I left my house and began jogging. A few of my neighbors had gone back inside, while others still had some duties like gardening. As I was looking at my bracelet, I looked back up and nearly bumped into an overweight, middle-aged, towering woman who was just standing in the middle of the sidewalk. I came to a halt and apologized to her, but I noticed that she was looking directly at the ground. She said nothing at all and didn't even care to look at me once. I walked around her and continued jogging, but there was something about her that wasn't okay at all. I quickly looked back, and now her head was pointing at my direction. I could see her bloodshot eyes through her long, messy hair. It gave me goosebumps, and I just looked away. When I got home, I forgot about her, and since the jog made me sweaty, I decided to take a nice hot shower. Afterwards, I put some clothes on and watched a movie on Netflix in the living room. I sat on my sofa that was behind a large window that didn't have curtains at the time. You'll see why I mentioned this. During the middle of the movie, I started to notice something on the TV. It looked like a reflection almost. Curious, I paused the movie and got up from the sofa to look closely. That's when I realized it was indeed a reflection of someone's face. I looked back and my eyes widened as I saw the same woman I almost bumped into. She had her tongue and chest pressed against the glass whilst giving me this perverted smile. Then she starts to bang the window with her right fist. I immediately grabbed my phone off the table as I ran upstairs to the bathroom, and locking the door, I laid down in my empty bathtub as I called the cops. Then I heard the window glass breaking, a sound that will be forever burned into my head. I could hear her footsteps climbing the stairs as I prayed to myself that the cops come here ASAP. As soon as the woman reaches the bathroom door, the sound of a man shouting "police" and woman getting tasered were sudden, but a relief at the same time. I waited until it was safe for me to go out. A police officer walked up to me and thanked me as he told me that they were looking for this woman for 2 weeks. He then explained that she was an escaped prisoner who was convicted for molesting her 15-year-old daughter. The scariest part about this was how ninja silent she was. I blamed the volume on the TV, but she managed to follow me back home without me noticing is strange. I didn't even have headphones on. A couple weeks later, I had to move out because I'd gotten a job somewhere else, and the police haven't given me an update yet. I also hope that vile woman rots in her cell for what she's done.
Board sitting in our closet collecting dust. When I was a kid, I always wondered what it was. From the box, it seemed like a horrible board game, until one day I found out what a Ouija board really is, and immediately dug it out of the closet. I insisted on my brother trying it out with me, and eventually got him to play along. We put our hands on the planchette, and I began asking the typical cliché questions like, "Is there anybody there?" and "Can you answer me?" Other than my brother jokingly moving the planchette around to imitate an answer from some kind of entity, there was no real response. After getting bored, we put the game back in the box. I did a little research that night to find out how to make Ouija boards work. Many people said online that the most ideal environment when using a Ouija board is in a dark room only lit by candles. So when my parents weren't home, I managed to gather like 6 or 7 candles and convinced my brother to try it one more time. I lit the candles and set them around the table in the dining room with all the lights out. We tried one more time. I asked again if there was anybody there. The planchette began to move. I told my brother to stop moving it, but he swore he wasn't. I told him to move his hand away, and he did. It kept moving. My brother thought I was messing with him, but I didn't pay attention. The planchette landed on the word yes. I was only 9, so I was legitimately shitting myself. My older brother had to take over. He asked the question, "Are you a good spirit?" There was a 5-second pause before my brother's hand moved along with the planchette to the word no. We both looked at each other, and at this point I ran to my room and shut the door behind me, but he continued on with the so-called game. I heard his muffled voice come from down in the dining room, when all of a sudden I heard him screaming at the top of his lungs. I ran back downstairs to see what was wrong. He was holding up his shirt, revealing a small open wound that almost looked like a claw mark. He told me to set the fireplace immediately, and I obeyed. He threw the thing in the fireplace and told me to never speak of what happened to anybody. We have never used a Ouija board since.
Years old. I had the best teacher ever who was also really kind. She let us do whatever we wanted and didn't care about us at all. I know that it wasn't appropriate for her students. However, because we were young kids, everyone liked her except for one person. He was what we called a nerd. He was smart, but he was a big snitch and really annoying. He always said we all needed to study and not goof around, but everyone ignored him. We heard that our teacher had been fired. There were rumors going around about her. One was that she was fired because the nerd had snitched on her and told his parents. They all complained to the principal. Soon the nerd was bullied a lot because of it, and he finally ended up leaving the school and moving to another one. When he packed his stuff and left the classroom on his last day, I saw him crying and staring at us with a bruised eye. It gave me goosebumps. About 2 years later, on a rainy day, we had to stay inside the classroom. We were just talking, playing, and doing other stuff as usual. When the class was about to start, our teacher told us all to use the bathroom beforehand. So while some of us were walking to the bathroom, we saw that the teacher who had been fired walked into the school. She was calm. As we walked past her, she suddenly looked at us, stopped us, and said, "Wait, I know you. You guys were in my class, right?" She was smiling at us, but somehow she looked very tired, and I felt a bit weird. We replied, Yes, ma'am." At that very moment, we saw a gang of boys following her, and I could see that they were holding knives with some blood on it. We then started screaming, but all the classrooms were far away from the bathroom, so nobody could hear our desperate screams. Then we turned around and told the teacher and the gang to please go away and spare us. Our teacher glared at us for a while and slowly started smiling. "Don't worry, you are next." As soon as she told us this, someone abruptly pulled out a knife and they all started grabbing us. The next thing I knew, we were dragged onto some kind of big van. My friends and I were crying and terrified. I knew something bad was going to happen. However, at that moment, when they pulled us into a van, we suddenly heard a loud siren. Fortunately, one of the teachers saw when they entered the school and stabbed some of the students. He immediately called the police. After they were arrested, all the students had to go home early and the school closed for a week. It turned out that the gang was hired by former surgeons who were fired for removing people's organs and killing them. Furthermore, our psychopath teacher had been working with them, and she was a murderer who would have murdered parents and raped their kids. A few months after, the whole gang was sentenced to 10 years in prison. She finally received a death sentence. However, that was not all. To our surprise, the police also found out that the nerd had been helping the teacher with murder for a long time. I don't know why he did that, but anyway, he will be charged with helping her with murder when he turns 18. With me was my boyfriend, and we were just having a fight. Maybe you were afraid to get involved in a stranger's business, but you saw my nervous, intimidated body language, and you acted. There were couples and groups everywhere, but it took you, another girl alone at the bar, to recognize my struggle and act. We made eye contact. I was twisting my body away from the man's touchy hands and pleaded with my eyes. The look you gave me back was more than clear. You understood exactly what was happening to me. You'd probably been through it yourself. I can see you coming over and calling me by a generic term instead of a random name. "Hey girl, it's been such a long time," you said, extending your arms and a lifeline. You wrapped your arms around me. It was a different sort of stranger's touch from the man's hand on my knee. I squealed like we were long-lost best friends, and I asked you what you were doing here. I remember the dull ache in my stomach when I heard you say that you were celebrating getting your master's in marine biology. Once upon a time, long before Rob and I ran these schemes in dirty bars, I had been a little girl that wanted to be a marine biologist. Oh well, that was literally a lifetime ago. Oh my god! Congrats, girl! I yelled at you violently and asked if you wanted to dance. Of course! You replied, returning my vigor like I had loaned it to you. While we were heading out to the dance floor, I thought long and hard about giving Rob a signal. Your interest in marine biology made me feel guilty for a moment, but I ultimately took it as a sign that you were just my type, that you would taste wonderful. Only God knows how hungry I was. So we started dancing, leaving behind Rob at the table. He hunkered off, pretending to be dejected. Nobody noticed him pass by where you had been sitting before, and nobody noticed him pour a small vial of liquid into your drink. Well, to the woman at the bar last night who noticed my body language, thank you for being so gullible.
Are ambitious, intelligent people who are trying to work hard to achieve a goal, in the hopes that one day they'll be able to quit for the sake of something better. And then there are the losers, those with no ambition who have given up and have no desire to achieve anything other than a weekly paycheck. I like to consider myself in the first category. As I was working hard to afford my apartment while taking classes at the local community college, I normally worked the later shifts at the drive-thru window, which is the one spot most employees hated working the most. You constantly have to deal with extremely impatient, oftentimes very rude people who are on their phones or have music blaring, and oftentimes don't realize that I wasn't the individual who took their order, so it's not my fault if it's wrong. In addition to that, you're pretty much constantly on your feet and exposed to the elements. No matter how cold, windy, or rainy it is, you have to keep leaning out into it, wishing that you were in a warm car about to drive away from this place. My point being is please try to be more kind and patient with the drive-thru people. Yeah, some are lazy, but most are trying their best, and even though you only see them for about half a minute, a kind remark or a warm smile might make their day. Anyways, now that I've gotten that off my chest, I work the late shift with two people who I believe qualify for the second category of employees. Connie was a high school dropout who was almost always late and was never invested in what she was doing, and Harold was a deadbeat who often smelled like weed and only kept the job because otherwise his parents would throw him out of the house. He was 32 years old. So one night I was there after 11 p.m. by the drive-thru window on an extremely cold January night, flipping through the pages of my class notes and trying to keep warm by the fry machine. Connie was mopping while looking at her phone, and Harold was in the back probably getting baked in the walk-in cooler. That late at night we rarely got customers, and if we did, they were almost always zonked out college kids who used the drive-thru but never physically walked into the restaurant. I stood up and stretched my legs and told Connie that I was heading to the bathroom. It was around 11:30 at this point. I came back less than 5 minutes later, with Connie more or less in the same spot that she was before. I walked past her and turned the corner to return to the window, and froze dead in my tracks. There was a bald man in white face makeup and a black hoodie standing directly outside the window staring in. His eyes were wide, with a blank expression that read, "What kind of trouble can I create?" The figure made direct eye contact with me and smirked, and slammed his palm against the window. I had no idea what to do, and inside my head, the words, clown, mime, psychopath, danger, and death all exploded like fireworks. The window was already shut and locked to protect myself from the cold, but the doors were all unlocked, and this person could easily walk right in and grab any one of us if he wanted to. In my head I kept referring to it as he, but honestly I had no idea what the gender was. The outfit and makeup made the stranger look androgynous.
Open.
Drawing out the word like a snake. Now even if the figure wasn't dressed like that, I was under no obligation to open the window. It's unlawful to serve walk-ups at the drive-thru window, certainly for their safety but also for ours. I shook my head and backed away. I called over my shoulder, "Lock the doors." The whole time this figure didn't break eye contact with me, and to the best of my memory, I don't even remember it blinking. It drew back its lips in a sinister smile, and I shit you not, its gums were black. I don't mean I was too far away that I couldn't see clearly. I mean its gums were as black as licorice.
Open.
It hissed again, louder this time. Its other hand slammed against the window, and it licked its lips with its tongue.
Open.
That's when a third hand slammed itself into the window. A left hand, and it was just as pale and as skeletal as the other two. I lost my shit. "Holy shit! Call the cops!" I screamed, and ran back into the office, which was the only room with a locking door and no windows. I heard Connie scream, "What the fuck?" And she dropped her mop and flew across the room and made for the back with me. All the yelling attracted Harold, and I shoved past him into the office and told him to look at the security camera. Sure enough, the white-faced creeper looked to have 3 hands on the window and was tilting its head back and forth, perhaps trying to discover where I ran off to. We locked the office door and called the cops, explaining to the operator that there was at least 2 prowlers outside acting in a threatening manner towards us. I kind of expected it to be over after I called the cops. If it was a prank, they would run once they realized they scared me enough to call 911. But it didn't end there. We watched as the figure left the drive-thru window, circled the building, and made for the restaurant door. "Is there a second one? Look for a second one," I panicked while still on the phone with the operator. Connie was freaking out, and Harold was muttering something about not getting the police involved, likely because he was carrying weed. That's when the power went out. Everything. Cameras, lights, phone, the whole building went down. And barely 10 seconds after we all quieted down after shouting at each other in the dark, we heard footsteps in the dining room area. "Connie, did you lock the doors?" I whispered. She didn't reply. I think she had her hand pressed over her mouth.
"Open!"
We heard a voice call from outside the room in the dark.
"Open!"
The shout came at least 3 more times, circling from the kitchen to right off the hallway where we were hiding. I was convinced I was about to die, and every decision I had made in my life that brought me there was flashing before my eyes. We heard footsteps pass the office. After another few minutes, we heard the wail of police sirens outside, and at any moment, we expected to hear gunfire and the police shouting at someone to get on the ground, but we never did. We waited until the police identified themselves, and opened the door and ran out into the parking lot. Since the power was down, we couldn't show the cops the security footage, so we just told them what we saw. They swept the whole building and said it was clear. The owner of that particular franchise store showed up about an hour later, after Harold and Connie had left. I waited for the power to be restored, so an officer could escort me back inside to collect my belongings. The next day my manager called me and asked me to work the night shift. I asked him if the creep from last night had been caught. When he said, "There was no creep," I told him I quit and hung up the phone. This story is completely true. I have no idea what caused the power outage, which apparently erased all the security footage from the day. Without proof on video, my manager and the cops concluded that it was an elaborate prank, but that third hand still bothers me to this day, even more so than its hungry, inhuman eyes. Sure, it could have been a prank, but I wish someone would just confirm that for me, so I can sleep again. Keep your windows locked at night, and if you hear someone tapping from behind the curtains, don't open them.
House must be some sort of social media influencer. The walls are thin, and she talks all the time. And I'm always hearing snippets of her recording videos or doing live streams. Anything from makeup tips to her favorite recipes to DIY hacks. I tried to find her channel once to see her videos, but I'm not that active on social media, and I don't even know her name, just her face and voice. So I gave up. We don't cross paths often, and I've never been good with the friendly neighbor. We do kind of smile and nod things when we see each other, but that's it. But the last few times I've heard her, she sounded off, like she's forcing the happy voice for her videos. I've been working from home for over a year. The only other place I really spent time was my boyfriend's house. That's why I've gotten pretty familiar with her tones. Now I can even tell the difference between when she's recording for her channel or when she's on the phone with friends. A few months ago, she sounded extra perky, and I heard her mention something about a new boyfriend. I was happy for her, even if hearing it made me a little sad. I hadn't been seeing my own boyfriend as much lately, since he'd been busy with a new project at work. But lately, things don't seem as good for her. I noticed the subjects she talks about seem to have changed. Instead of the typical thing, how I prep a week of meals in an hour, or let's unbox this free set from so-and-so, I've heard her say something like this. Today, I want to teach you about how to notice red flags when you start seeing someone, or tips from moving on from a stalker. I was starting to get worried about her. I was considering going to knock on her door and introducing myself to see if she was okay, but I was swamped with work at that time. And I'd finally heard from my boyfriend after a few days of radio silence. I shrugged it off, thinking she had enough people supporting her. Maybe she was just getting into the true crime genre like every other girl, and I was being overdramatic. I ended up going to stay the night at my boyfriend's. I got home an hour or so ago and was settling in for dinner and a movie on my couch when I heard a different voice on her side of the house for the first time. And it was my boyfriend's voice. I just heard what he said. I think I need to call 911. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to teach you how to get revenge on the bitch who broke up with you.
Today, inmate number 1857, hanging on his cell bars, shouted at me, "Hey, your daughter's 7 years old this year, right? She's the first one I'll visit when I get out." "What?" Enraged, I rushed to the bars and grabbed his collar, and he laughed as if it were amusing. Inmate 1857. His name is Rick, the most notorious criminal in this prison. Rick is a psychopath who killed a woman in her 60s, chopped her up with a knife, and even ate her flesh before claiming insanity. Rick was incredibly lucky. The victim's son actively sought leniency for him. The devout Christian son decided to forgive Rick in the name of God, even after his mother was brutally murdered. It was something I couldn't understand at all. Thanks to this, Rick was acknowledged as mentally impaired and received a 15-year sentence only. After his sentence was confirmed, Rick began to show his true colors. He constantly hurled insults without reason and threatened to kill the families of those who irritated him once he was released. Knowing his madness, people grew anxious as his release date approached. The ironic thing was that this psychopath was a dutiful son. Having lived with a single mother his entire life, he cherished her dearly. His mother began preparing to open a beef jerky store with Rick about a month before his release, and started sending boxes of jerky and letters to the prison. However, bringing in outside food was strictly forbidden in the prison. So we tried to return the parcels she sent, but the warden stopped me and said he would allow the packages to be delivered to Rick. I couldn't understand his actions. The warden must have been bribed by Rick's mother. "Dear son, your mother is preparing a jerky business these days. Please try it and give me your feedback. From your future business partner, Mom." When I opened the box of jerky, I saw a letter written in meticulous handwriting. She seemed quite serious about the business, sending a box of jerky made with various recipes to the prison every week. Smoked, chili, teriyaki flavors, and more. Thanks to this, Rick spent his days chewing on jerky. He even began using the jerky like currency, ordering his cellmates around. The prisoners, who relied solely on the prison-provided rations, cleaned for Rick, acted violently on his behalf, or dug up information on people Rick didn't like in exchange for jerky. Rick also collected feedback from the inmates about which jerky recipe tasted the best, and sent letters to his mother. He was already fulfilling his role as a business partner before his release. He showed no remorse for the deceased victim and focused solely on making the business prosper. I was angry at the victim's son. If my mother had been so brutally murdered, I would have never forgiven the perpetrator. Due to his excessive tolerance, the evil demon would soon be released into the world, and more victims would follow, which could include my own family. Rick's release date approached, now just a week away, and his mother had already opened the store and was waiting for him. The store was named Mom's Beef Jerky, as a tribute to her love for her son. As the release date neared and my anxiety peaked, I took a secret day off, which I didn't tell my wife and daughter about. I had to visit Rick's store, track his movements, and carefully devise ways to protect my family from him. When I went to the address written on the letter, Mom's Beef Jerky, I noticed a sign with a familiar phrase. It was a store opened by Rick's mother. At that time, I saw the warden coming out of the store. It was clear that he was involved in some sort of backroom dealing with Rick's mother. I hid in my car until the warden disappeared, then entered the store. Now that I had witnessed it with my own eyes, I had to expose their inappropriate dealings. As I opened the store door, there stood a man there with fair skin and a gentle demeanor. "Welcome." "Huh? Isn't this Rick's mother's store?" "Oh, yes, it is. Who are you?" "You should be the employee. I'm a prison guard at the prison where your son is incarcerated. I saw the warden leaving just now. What's the relationship between him and Rick's mother?" "Oh, Rick's mother is inside. Would you like to meet her and hear it directly from her? Follow me." I followed the man to a storeroom deep inside the kitchen, and he pointed to the ceiling, saying, "She's here." There, a middle-aged woman's head was hanging from the ceiling, shriveled and twisted after being soaked in sauce. "Ah! What is this?" I was so shocked that I screamed and collapsed on the spot. Then the man smiled brightly and said, "I'm the son of the woman who was killed by Rick. I've been waiting for Rick to be released and come to this store as soon as possible. Whew! I've sent the rest of the body, and now only the head remains. I'll prepare the head according to the final recipe Rick advised, and plan to send it to the prison tomorrow." I ran out of there in utter disbelief, and didn't tell anyone about what happened that day. A week later, I saw the corner of the prison warden's mouth go up strangely as he stared at Rick, who was happily tasting the last delivered jerky. And not long after his release, Rick went missing.